if you're wondering who I am, I'm just an old git who's been around the block a few times. And I'm one of my group who doesn't suffer from craft. You know what craft is? Can't remember a fucking thing.
Where's the craft?
I have this incredible ability to remember too much, which is sometimes really boring, and I've become a bit of a pedant. But I enjoy my life, and I knew Nick, as well as a lot of people who didn't know him back in the old days, particularly with someone I plan to attend tonight with, the wonderful Beverly Cutner, you probably know as Beverly Martin, who was one of the most beautiful voices you'd ever heard. Unfortunately, she married John Martin, who was a great musician, but it didn't do her career any good at all. And unfortunately for you lot, you never heard what she was able to come up with. And Nick Drake did. Nick and Beverly sang and played together all the time. Whenever he was free, he would head straight round to the Martins' residence in Hampstead. We all lived in Hampstead at that time. And there was many an afternoon and long, long late nights where we would get completely wasted on really delightful things like Afghani Black, Red Leb, whatever. But it was better living through chemistry for us in those days. And Nick liked his chemistry set. And I've heard stories told of Nick by lots of people who had no idea. I think I saw one thing on the film where someone said he had really dirty fingernails. Where can you hide your dope without someone finding it? Under your fingernails. It was the perfect. He was terrified about being busted because many of our friends had been, and all we wanted to do those days was have a nice time. Nick would be flabbergasted to learn that people are so into him today. But I think deep from his soul, he'd probably say, "Where the fuck were you 39 years ago when I needed you?" Lovely man. Very, very shy. Was never as gregarious as John Martin or other people he hung around with. A rather complex chap too. I used to run a bunch of shows at the Roundhouse called Implosion from 69 through 1973. And every week, of course, I'd play Nick because I loved him. It was one of the few. Unfortunately, the general public, I hate that word public, because we're all public really, never got it. There were some great people who understood what Nick was doing, but it never got sold. And in a funny way, after he made Bryter Layter, kind of broke his heart, because I know he put his heart and soul and a lot else into it. I made a few notes so I don't ramble on for 400 years, because I have a tendency to do that. At John and Beverly's in Hampstead, we used to many late night sing-songs. We'd sing Beatles songs, Everly Brothers songs, Buddy Holly songs. So I was very lucky to get more of Nick than most back then. Of course, I saw his Royal Festival Hall bash, or was it Queen Elizabeth Hall with John and Beverly Martin, which didn't go down too well. And I also saw him at Les Cousins in Andrew Matthews' club in Greek Street, where he used to take forever to go through tuning. Didn't always last the whole set, because Nick would get kind of lost, which was a great shame, because once he found it, he was brilliant. As I'm sure you all know, that's why you're here. You've seen the inner soul of a beautiful man. It's just a great shame that he became kind of bipolar and lost it. Beverly Martin, I mentioned before. I wish she'd been here with me. She said last week that she would join me on stage and talk to you about him too, because she has a lot to tell which she's never told. But I asked her if I could tell her little story for her tonight. Nick Drake loved Beverly Martin deeply, more than as just a friend. She was married, of course, to one of his good friends, John Martin, which made life very difficult. She would always treat him like a big sister, encourage him, of course, helped him with lots and lots, and they wrote some really, really funny songs together, which nobody has ever heard. Really strange reggae pieces, and I think I still have a couple of tapes that we used to make, but I've never put them about because they were private. I want to tell you something. Bryter Layter, for me, is the most fantastic LP, and I would use it every show I ever did as a disc jockey. I was a disc jockey 40 years ago, and I used to play records everywhere, all the concerts and all the pop festivals, and Nick was always in my set, as he will be week after next at the 50th anniversary of Island Records. I shall be playing a few tunes of Nick there, maybe something that people haven't heard before. Who knows? But once upon a time, Chris Blackwell, the owner of Island Records, came to the Roundhouse one Sunday. He said, "Do you know, we've sold more records through you playing it than we have through John Peel playing his records." And John, of course, loved Nick too, before he went punk. But it was very odd that playing the records at pop concerts and festivals would actually sell a few. And I hope I helped keep Nick alive until he lost his subsidy. And I think that really did for him. He used to hang out in Hampstead, and there were a few other people around that house scene. We lived in a wonderful house in Hampstead Way. We moved into in end of 1969, and all kinds of people would drop by, particularly John and Beverly, and sometimes they'd bring Nick. Otherwise he'd slink in the garden and hide if other people like Cat Stevens was there. And of course everyone wanted to hear Nick, but he was often too shy unless he got really comfy with someone like Beverly, and then you'd hear the best of him. And it was like all the best music you hear at home, as soon as you start to project it, I think some of it gets lost. That's why all those old blues records from the 20s, 30s and 40s still sound so wonderful today, even if they were recorded on dodgy technology. Cat Stevens, I've got to introduce him in 3 weeks' time, as I said, at the last but one night of the Island Records 50th anniversary. I'll share a joke with you because everyone's warned me not to do it at the gig. I was going to introduce him with his new reworked Island album, TNT for the Taliban. All right, then I won't use it. I thought it was great. You know, Bryter Layter has a lot of dedications to the first solo Neil Young record, don't you? Or do you not? Is this on the blogs? I've been reading a couple of blogs recently, but I didn't find it. Does anyone know that? No? Well, it's perfectly true, because he and Joe Boyd adored that record. Opens with an instrumental, closes with an instrumental, just like Neil Young's first record did. Now I'm going to break a myth or two tonight. I've probably already broken too many, and people are going to hate me afterwards, but I did love him, honestly, truly. I've got something with me. I'm not going to play it, don't worry. I might play the spoons though. Where's the photographers. Where's the guitarist? You can see I'm not a regular guitar player. Anyone know what that is?
Guild M20.
Now, there's been thousands of myths about this guitar and Nick Drake. Nick Drake had it for one day only. But the guitar itself has an incredible story, and he knew some of that story, but he doesn't know what happened after the day he was photographed by John Ivor Gollywog, whose real name is Nigel Weymouth, sitting in a chair. The chair was Charles Dickens' chair. Did you know that? I bet you didn't. So the guitar and the chair and Nick and Nigel's blue suede shoes in front were just a phenomenal piece of engineering for selling Nick on. Nick didn't get it at the time, but it wasn't until 2 years later that he actually said, "I got it, Nigel. I think it's fantastic. I didn't get it at the time, but now I look at myself in that chair with that beautiful Guild. I love it." I'll tell you the history of the guitar. It was first bought at the end of 1966. Christmas, New Year, 67, by another guitar player called Eric Clapton, who lived in the Pheasantry with a guy called Martin Sharp, who was another artist like Nigel Weymouth. That guitar wrote Tales of Brave Ulysses, which is kind of ironic in a way when we think about Nick having that as his guitar. When they left the Pheasantry, about 1971, the Guild went to Nigel Weymouth. No, it would have been 69, sorry, because he photographed him at the end of 69. So the guitar became the property of Nigel Weymouth, along with Charles Dickens' chair. I had an assistant, a young assistant at the Roundhouse, a young fella called Nick Laird Clues, sometimes known as Trash Monk, who came to my shows every Sunday at the Roundhouse when he was about 14 and always asked for the most beautiful records that I wouldn't imagine coming from a 14-year-old. So I invited him on stage to help me with the records and go through it. And he gradually learned to play guitar. He got a Yamaha. When he finally left school, he got his first job working packing records at RCA. He said, "I need a real guitar." And I said, "I know the guitar you've got to have. That's it." So we went to Nigel Weymouth, pleaded with him to sell it to Nick Laird Clues. That guitar, some years later, wrote a song with the writer and the player, of course, Nick Laird Clues, called "Life in a Northern Town," which I'm sure you know is dedicated to Nick. And about 9 months later, the guitar was restrung, beginning of 1986. The same strings that are on it now. We got a guitar player here we can borrow? Just for a minute. I've been asked not to have it played because it's so fragile in its old age, but Stuart's going to give us...
Sit down so I don't...
Oh my God. It's a very fragile old baby, but the strings on it... Those are the strings that appeared on Paul Simon's Graceland. They are very, very unusually tuned. They're played to fit in with African musicians. And Nick hasn't had the heart to take them off since. because Paul Simon took Nick Laird-Clewes under his wing to help him create beautiful songs, which he did between 1984 and 1987. So that's the story of the Guild MD20. I hope I haven't shattered guitarists' dreams who have been searching everywhere for it. But the guitar has its own little history, and it's quite magic. Incredibly more magic is there's only 3 degrees left of separation since the recession. The guitar, Paul Simon, Nick Laird-Clewes, Nick Drake. When Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel appeared at Monterey Pop Festival, they took a beautiful woman with them who came up with the beautiful lines. Have you had a busy day, Mr. Leach? And that was Beverly Cutner, later Beverly Martin, who flew to Monterey on a special ticket bought by Paul Simon under the name of Mrs. Beverly Simon, so he could save money. That's the end of my little jokes. Thank you very much for having me here, and I love the fact that you all appreciate what Nick did. I still do, and I play him all the time. I have to thank, of course, Nick Laird-Clewes, Trash Monk, for allowing me to take it from his vault. He is so proud of this guitar. It's precious to him, of course. But I know something. When he rewrote his will the year before last, I inherit it. But he's 11 years younger than me.